The room exploded with applause. As I held the diploma I'd spent years earning. Then my father stood, lifted his glass, smiled at everyone, and said one sentence that froze the entire party. In that moment, I realized my graduation wasn't the celebration he'd planned. It was the stage for my greatest humiliation. The tassel on my graduation cap kept brushing against my cheek as I laughed with friends outside the university auditorium. I should have been thinking about my future, about the job offer waiting for me, or about finally finishing the degree I'd fought so hard to earn. Instead, I was thinking about my dad. I kept telling myself that maybe today would be different. Maybe today, he'd finally look at me the way fathers looked at their children in all those graduation photos, full of pride, admiration, maybe even love. I knew it was a childish hope, but some hopes never really die. My name is Emma, and if you'd asked anyone who knew my family, they would have told you my younger sister, Lily, was the star of our house. Lily wasn't a bad person. She was funny, outgoing, effortlessly charming. She could walk into any room and make people laugh within minutes. Dad adored that about her. Everything Lily did was exciting. Everything I did was simply expected. When Lily earned a B on a history test, Dad took everyone out for dinner. When I graduated at the top of my class in high school, he nodded once and asked if I'd started looking at scholarships. Growing up, I convinced myself it didn't bother me. Someone had to be responsible. Someone had to help Mum pay bills after Dad's business failed. Someone had to work evenings while taking a full class schedule. That someone was always me. By the time college came around, I'd earned enough scholarships to cover most of my tuition. The rest, I paid for myself. Weekend shifts, late-night tutoring, freelance editing, summer internships. There were semesters when I survived on instant noodles because every extra dollar went toward textbooks. Dad never noticed. Or maybe he did. He just never cared enough to mention it. Lily, meanwhile, changed majors 3 different times before deciding college wasn't really her thing. Dad told everyone she was finding herself. When I heard that, I smiled. Then I went back to work because someone still had rent to pay. Graduation day arrived faster than I expected. Walking across that stage felt surreal. As my name echoed through the speakers, I searched the audience. Mom stood first. She was crying before I even accepted my diploma. Beside her, Lily clapped enthusiastically. Dad! He looked down at his phone. Maybe he hadn't heard my name. Maybe he was answering an important message. I spent the next hour making excuses for him. That's what children do. We become experts at translating disappointment into understanding. After the ceremony, Mom insisted we celebrate at home. She'd spent 2 days cooking. My favorite dishes covered the dining table. Family friends filled the backyard. Neighbors came by. Everyone kept congratulating me. For the first time in years, I actually felt seen. I even caught Dad smiling once or twice while talking to guests. Maybe this really would be different. As the sun began to set, someone suggested speeches. My aunt tapped her glass. I think the proud father should say a few words. The backyard erupted into applause. Dad stood slowly. He adjusted his jacket, cleared his throat, and accepted a glass of champagne. He looked around the crowd with a warm smile I'd rarely seen directed at me. This is a very special day for our family. Everyone nodded. So many years of hard work finally brought us here. I felt my eyes sting. Those were the words I'd wanted to hear my entire life. Dad turned toward me. For one brief second, I believed everything between us was about to change. He raised his glass. I wish. The backyard fell completely silent. It was you holding that diploma. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking straight at Lily. Then he smiled at her. I always thought you were the one meant for greatness. Silence. No laughter, no clinking glasses, nothing. Every guest looked from him, to me, to the diploma still resting in my hands. I couldn't breathe. For a second, I genuinely wondered if I'd imagined it. Then Dad continued, "Life doesn't always reward the right child." Someone gasped. Mom whispered, "Stop." He ignored her. I've always believed Lily deserved opportunities more than Emma ever did. My hands started shaking. The diploma slipped slightly inside its frame. Dad wasn't finished. Emma worked hard, sure. But hard work isn't everything. He pointed toward Lily. Some people are simply born for bigger things. My sister's face turned white. Dad, he laughed. I'm just telling the truth. The guests looked horrified. One family friend quietly set down his drink. Another began gathering her purse. No one knew where to look. I stared at the man who was supposed to be celebrating me. The man whose approval I'd chased my entire life. The man who had just announced, in front of everyone I loved, that he wished my biggest achievement belonged to someone else. I felt years of ignored birthdays, missed congratulations, broken promises, dismissed accomplishments, crash into me all at once. Something inside me finally stopped trying to earn his love. I placed my diploma carefully on the table. Then I smiled, not because I was okay, because I just made a decision that would change every single person at that party forever. I looked directly into my father's eyes. "You're right," I said quietly. "You've always chosen the wrong daughter." The smile disappeared from his face, and before anyone could stop me, I reached into my purse, pulled out a sealed envelope I'd been carrying all day, and placed it in the middle of the table. "Dad," I said, "before you say another word, there's something everyone here deserves to know." Every conversation stopped. Every eye shifted to the envelope. Dad frowned. "What is that supposed to be?" I slid it toward him. "It's the reason this is the last family celebration we'll ever have together." He laughed nervously, until he saw the return address printed in the corner. The color drained from his face. He recognized it instantly, and for the first time in my life, my father looked genuinely afraid. No one spoke. The only sound in the backyard was the faint hum of crickets and the ice melting in forgotten glasses. Dad stared at the envelope as though it might explode. His confident smile had vanished. "Emma," he said, forcing out a laugh, "this isn't the time for whatever little stunt you're trying to pull. It stopped being your time a few minutes ago." Mom looked between us nervously. "Honey, what's in the envelope?" I didn't answer her. Not yet. Instead, I looked around the backyard. Every person there had watched my father humiliate me. Some looked embarrassed. Others looked furious on my behalf. My aunt folded her arms. My college mentor, Professor Harris, stood silently beside the buffet table, watching every second unfold. Even Lily hadn't moved. She looked more confused than anyone. "Dad," she whispered. "What is she talking about?" He ignored her. He reached for the envelope. His fingers trembled just enough for me to notice. Then he stopped. He didn't open it. Instead, he slid it back toward me. "I'm not playing games." "You already did," I replied. "You just didn't realize the game was ending tonight." His jaw tightened. "What do you think you've got?" "I think you know exactly what it is." The confidence disappeared from his face again. For years, I'd wondered what expression he would wear if he ever lost control. Now I knew. Fear, real fear. Lily frowned. "Emma, seriously, what is going on?" I finally looked at my sister. She wasn't smirking. She wasn't enjoying this. If anything, she looked sick. And that's when something finally became clear. She hadn't asked for any of this. Growing up, I'd blamed her for everything, for being the favorite, for getting the praise, for receiving every opportunity. But standing there, I realized she'd been trapped inside Dad's expectations, just as much as I'd been trapped outside them. Different cages, same prison. I don't blame you, I said quietly. Her eyes widened. You don't? No, Dad snapped. Enough. He grabbed the envelope. If this is your attempt to embarrass me, you embarrassed yourself. His face reddened. With one sharp motion, he tore the envelope open. Several papers slid onto the table. The first page landed face up. Mom gasped. Dad immediately tried to flip it over. Too late. Professor Harris had already read the heading. So that's what this is. Everyone turned toward him. He adjusted his glasses. It's a business acquisition notice. Silence. Dad glared at him. You stay out of this. Professor Harris looked at me instead. You really did it. I nodded once. Dad slammed the papers together. They don't need to know. Oh, I said. They absolutely do. He shoved the documents back into the envelope. This is private. Not anymore. Mum looked utterly lost. What business? I swallowed. The company Dad lost 15 years ago. Mom blinked. What? Dad barked. Emma! But I kept talking. The one he always said was stolen from him. Mum stared. I thought it went bankrupt. So did I. I looked directly at Dad. Until 6 months ago. 6 months earlier. I had been working late at the investment firm, where I'd landed my first full-time job after graduation requirements were complete. One client file caught my attention, not because of the company, because of the address. It matched my childhood memories. Curious, I kept reading. The business Dad claimed had been destroyed, had never disappeared. It had changed ownership, then ownership again. Eventually, it became part of a much larger corporation. Its value had grown into the millions. At first, I simply wanted answers. Then I found something else, Dad's signature, again and again. Documents he'd never mentioned. Documents proving he hadn't been cheated. He'd sold his shares willingly, for cash. Money that disappeared within 2 years. Not because someone robbed him, because he gambled on risky investments and lost everything. The family had spent 15 years believing he'd been betrayed. He hadn't. He'd lied. Mom sat down slowly. No, Dad pointed at me. Those papers don't tell the whole story. Then tell it. He couldn't, because the documents were only the beginning. I reached into my purse again. Another envelope, thicker this time. I handed it to Mom. Dad lunged. I stepped backward. Don't! His voice cracked. Emma! Mom opened it before he could stop her. Bank statements, old contracts, emails, signed agreements, everything. Each page peeled away another lie. Each document erased another excuse. Mom covered her mouth. You sold it. Dad stayed silent. You told me someone forged your signature. Nothing. You swore on our children's lives. Nothing. I defended you. Still nothing. Lily whispered, Dad. He wouldn't look at either of us. I continued, when I discovered the truth. I paused. I contacted the current owners. Every guest leaned forward. I expected them to ignore me. Instead, they invited me to a meeting. Apparently, they had been searching for someone in our family. Someone willing to help restore the company's original mission. Someone with the qualifications they needed. My degree. My internship experience. Years of financial research. Everything I'd worked for. It wasn't just enough. It was exactly what they were looking for. Dad finally found his voice. You didn't. I did. His face went pale again. Professor Harris smiled. I wondered why you'd turned down 3 major firms. I nodded. I accepted a different offer. Mum looked at me. What offer? I took a slow breath. I wasn't hired. Everyone waited. I became one of the new owners. Gasps spread across the yard. Dad actually stumbled backward. No, the acquisition finalized yesterday. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. I continued. I now own 22% of the company. The silence was deafening. The same company Dad claimed had been stolen. The same company he'd mocked me for studying. The same company he'd once called worthless. Now, it belonged partly to me, his daughter, the one he never believed in. He laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It sounded desperate. You expect anyone to believe that? Before I answered, a black luxury sedan pulled into the driveway. Every head turned. A man in an expensive navy suit stepped out, then a woman carrying a leather portfolio. Professor Harris smiled knowingly. They're early. Dad frowned. Who are they? The woman approached me first. Congratulations, Ms. Carter. She shook my hand. The board asked us to deliver these personally. She handed me another folder, then looked toward my father. You must be Mr. Carter. He nodded cautiously. I'm Linda Matthews, Corporate Counsel. She offered a polite smile. I believe you've been informed about the ownership transition. He stared blankly. She continued. As part of today's transfer, she opened her portfolio. All previous personal claims regarding the company have officially expired. Dad's breathing became uneven. You can't, she interrupted gently. We already have. Then she turned toward me. The board also approved your recommendation. I smiled. They did. Unanimously, Dad whispered. What recommendation? Linda looked surprised. He doesn't know. No. She nodded sympathetically. Then perhaps this isn't the best setting. It is. She hesitated, then continued. The board voted to restore the company's founding scholarship program. Several guests smiled. She kept reading. It will now provide full college tuition for 100 first-generation students every year. Applause broke out across the backyard. But Linda wasn't finished. The scholarship will carry the name selected by our newest partner. Mum smiled proudly through tears. What did you name it? I looked straight at Dad. The Margaret Carter Scholarship. Mom froze. My name. You were the one who sacrificed everything so we could survive. She burst into tears. Dad looked invisible. Not angry. Not embarrassed. Invisible. For the first time in his life, no one was looking at him. Everyone was looking at Mom. At me. At the future. Lily quietly walked over and wrapped her arms around me. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I hugged her back. You never needed to apologize. She cried against my shoulder. I spent years thinking Dad was proud of me. I smiled sadly. He wasn't proud of either of us. She pulled back. What do you mean? He only loved the version of us that made him feel important. Those words hit Dad harder than anything else I'd said all evening. Because they were true, he took one slow step toward us. Girls. Neither of us moved. Then he said something none of us expected. I'm sick. Mom frowned. What? I found out 3 weeks ago. Silence returned. I have a heart condition. He swallowed hard. The doctors say I need surgery. The backyard fell quiet once more. For just a second. I couldn't tell whether he was finally telling the truth or beginning one last lie. Then Linda, the corporate attorney, quietly looked down at a document in her portfolio. Her expression changed instantly. She looked from the paper to my father, then slowly to me. Emma. Her voice was barely above a whisper. There's something else in these records. What is it? She hesitated, then said the words that made my entire world stop. I don't think Richard Carter is the only person who lied about your family's past. Every eye turned toward her. Even Dad looked confused. She opened one final sealed file. My office found this while verifying the company's original ownership records. She looked directly at me. It isn't about the business. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. It's about your birth. The folder opened. A single faded document slipped onto the table. Mum saw it first. The color drained from her face. And before anyone else could read it, she whispered one sentence that changed everything. Oh God, Emma was never supposed to find that.